Tonight, South Korea orders evacuations near a maritime border after hundreds of artillery rounds are fired from the north. The search for survivors becomes a heartbreaking recovery operation in Japan's earthquake disaster zone. Israel responds to intensified cross-border attacks from southern Lebanon with more strikes on Hezbollah targets. And 2024 shapes up as a major year for space exploration, starting with the first commercial flight to the moon. I'm Anton. This is SBS World News. Good evening. We begin tonight with a developing story on the Korean Peninsula. South Korean officials have announced that North Korea has fired more than 200 artillery shells into the sea near the maritime border. They've called the shelling a provocative act. SBS reporter Liz Maddock has been following developments and joins us now from the newsroom. Liz, what more can you tell us?
So, Anton, in just the last few hours, South Korea's military has ordered residents on Yeongpyeong Island to evacuate to shelters. Now, it's the first time that such an order has been given in nearly 13 years. The artillery shells were fired towards the island, which is home to a military base and around 2,000 people. It lies just a few kilometres from the disputed maritime border and around 12 kilometres from the North Korean coast. Now, South Korea says it detected the artillery at 9 o'clock this morning local time, and the country's media is reporting that the shells landed in the maritime buffer zone, which was established in 2018 in order to try and reduce tensions. Now, South Korea has condemned the move, calling it a provocative act.
It is a provocation that threatens peace and heightens tensions in the Korean Peninsula. We gravely warn North Korea is solely responsible for the heightened tension and urge North Korea to immediately cease such acts.
It's not the first time that North Korea has done this. In 2010, 2 soldiers and 2 civilians were killed after North Korea fired dozens of artillery shells towards the island. Now, this week, South Korea and US troops, they've been holding joint drills with heavy weapons near the border with North Korea. Those ended just yesterday. The US has also deployed more military assets near the Korean Peninsula, including a nuclear-armed submarine, aircraft carriers and large bombers. Now, in a tour of a factory, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has called for a boost in production of missile launch vehicles. He says it's an important task to prepare for what he's called a military showdown with the enemy.
Thanks, Liz. Liz Maddock updating us live from the newsroom on the situation in the Korean Peninsula. 4 days after the devastating earthquake which shook Japan's Noto Peninsula, hope is fading of finding any more survivors. 92 people have been killed and hundreds injured in the magnitude 7.6 quake, which hit the country's west coast on New Year's Day. Rescue teams are still struggling to reach many of the impacted areas, with local roads and infrastructure severely damaged.
Wajima City now resembles a war zone. The local market, which stood for close to 1,000 years, lies in ruins. So too people's homes, as residents comb through the rubble, searching for anything to salvage.
My house was here, right here, and the one next to it. This is the first time I've seen it. Everything is gone.
This vision taken on New Year's Day shows how powerful the tremors were. A landslide spilling into the city, crushing everything in its path. Miraculous tales of survival are still unfolding. A woman in her 80s reportedly pulled out alive here last night, 3 days after the quake struck. Vision also emerging of another rescue in Suzu, a man also in his 80s plucked from his home on Wednesday. Dozens remain missing, but with the crucial 72-hour window of survival now past, hope they will be found alive is fading. Japan has received offers of assistance from dozens of countries, including the United States, China and Taiwan. But the Prime Minister says authorities need more time to prepare.
The situation in the disaster-affected areas remains challenging, but we will continue to take all possible measures to support the victims.
Several areas in the Ishikawa prefecture have been severely impacted. Tens of thousands of people are still sheltering in evacuation centres. Even there, many have no electricity, and supplies of food and safe drinking water are dwindling.
We're sleeping on the ground, so for old people, it's really tough. Yesterday, 2 stoves arrived, but before that, we were in the cold. For old people, this is a terrible cold place.
For those who can return home, there's a long road ahead. This woman's shop was severely damaged along with all the others in this business hub. She says many won't have the strength to rebuild.
And Aaron Fernandez joins us now live from Toyama, the operations base for the impacted area. Aaron, good evening to you. We understand this is a delicate stage. Some areas still haven't been reached by the rescue teams. Could you sketch for us what lies ahead for authorities?
Yeah, sure, Anton. Good evening to you. Well, authorities are still struggling to access some of the worst hit areas, and those efforts will continue in the days ahead. But as we've been reporting tonight, that 72-hour window since the quake has now closed, and so it's expected that what was rescue efforts will turn to recovery efforts, sadly. I've just arrived at an evacuation centre in Himi City, and it's fair to say the mood here is both sombre yet determined. This is a sports stadium that's currently sheltering around 70 evacuees here. They're able to receive food from local volunteers, and there's defence personnel on site distributing water. This is one of many across the disaster zone that's sheltering tens of thousands of people that have been left homeless after the quake. Those the efforts by authorities that will continue in the coming days. Of course, we've heard about the engineering and build quality that Japan invests in its building structures. The buildings here are designed to collapse in a particular way, so when the rescue teams do arrive at those sites over the coming days, they're looking for particular places within those properties where residents were able to find shelter, and perhaps there will still be some positive news in the days ahead. Anton.
That is Aaron Fernandez updating us live from an evacuation centre in Japan. Japan Airlines has revealed the pilots involved in Tuesday's crash were not immediately aware the plane was on fire. A company spokesperson said cabin crew had to tell them the aircraft was on fire following the fatal collision with a Coast Guard plane. Pilots must give permission before the doors can be opened and emergency slides deployed. All 379 passengers and crew were safely evacuated from the Airbus, but 5 of the 6 crew on the smaller plane died. Japan Airlines says the incident will cost it more than $140 million. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making his 4th trip to the Middle East since the war in Gaza began, amid heightened fears that the conflict between Israel and Hamas will spill into the wider region. This is as a top Hamas leader was buried in Beirut after being killed in a drone strike that the group and its ally Hezbollah is blaming on Israel.
Streaming through the streets of Beirut, thousands of mourners farewell deceased Hamas commander Saleh al-Aruri. One of the group's key leaders was killed in a drone strike in Lebanon's capital on Tuesday. The attack, which killed 6 other members of Hamas, designated a terrorist organisation by many countries, including Australia, was widely attributed to Israel, which has neither confirmed nor denied responsibility. The Israeli military says it struck Hezbollah observation posts and infrastructure. The group, an ally of Hamas, says its fighters carried out several attacks along the Israel-Lebanon border. Soaring tensions amid Israel's war with Hamas, intensifying fears of a regional escalation after targeted attacks by Israel in Syria and Lebanon, by IS in Iran and the US in Iraq over the past 5 days.
يريد أن يصدر أزمته إلى الخارج. يريد أن يوسع دائرة العدوان ظنا أن ذلك يربك حسابات المقاومة وحسابات المنطقة.
In Gaza, Israel has continued its bombardments, confirming strikes on areas in the north and the south. According to the Palestine Red Crescent Society, Israeli forces targeted its headquarters in Khan Yunis, leaving several displaced people injured. This house in Rafah was also struck, prompting an urgent search for survivors beneath the rubble. As the Israeli Prime Minister met with US Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, he reiterated Israel's goals of war.
Destroying Hamas, releasing our hostages, making sure Gaza doesn't become a threat again. For that, we'll apply maximum power with maximum precision everywhere that's needed.
Meanwhile, Israel's defence minister presented his plan for Gaza once the war is over. The proposal sees Israel retain overall security control, while Palestinians would be responsible for running the territory. Such talk of Gaza's future has led to deep disagreement in Israel, leaving its war cabinet fiercely divided. Rochelle Harrison-Pless, SBS World News.
A US military strike in Baghdad has killed a militia leader who the Pentagon says was involved in recent attacks on US personnel. The strike has been condemned by Iraq's government, which is facing increased pressure to expel remaining US troops.
On the back of this ute lies the coffin of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces leader, killed in a US airstrike.
U.S. forces took necessary and proportionate action against Mushtaq Jawad Kazim al-Jawari, a.k.a. Abu Taqwa, who is a Harakat al-Najuba leader. Abu Taqwa was actively involved in planning and carrying out attacks against American personnel. The strike also killed another Han member.
It comes amid heightened regional tensions since the escalation of the Hamas-Israel conflict. The US has 2,500 troops in Iraq with a mission to prevent an IS resurgence. Last week, the Iraqi government said it's proceeding to end the presence of international coalition forces.
I'm not going to speculate about what the future may portend or get into hypotheticals. As I mentioned earlier, US forces are in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq to help train and advise in support of the Defeat ISIS mission.
The Iraqi government now facing mounting pressure.
نستنكر هذا الاعتداء السافر من قبل القوات الأمريكية الذي تطاولت في هذا الاعتداء على وطن وله سيادة وعلم وبرلمان وحكومة، ولكن للأسف البرلمان صامت والحكومة لا تأدي دورها في اتخاذ قرار بخروج المحتل والدفاع عن الوطن.
Iraq's armed forces have labelled the attack a blatant aggression, saying this action undermines the previously established understandings between the Iraqi armed forces and the global coalition forces. We view this action as a dangerous escalation and assault on Iraq. The Pentagon maintains the strike was taken in self-defence, saying no civilians were harmed or infrastructure struck. Tanya Dandrinos, SBS World News.
The IS group says it was behind the 2 explosions that killed 84 people at a memorial ceremony in Iran. The group says 2 members of IS detonated explosive belts in the southeastern city of Kerman. The blasts went off as crowds gathered to remember Qasem Soleimani, a former Revolutionary Guards commander. He was killed in Iraq by a US drone 4 years ago. And amid fears the escalating tensions could fuel a wider regional war, the Prime Minister has today reiterated the US-led coalition warning that Houthi rebels will face consequences if they continue attacking shipping in the Red Sea.
What we want is for the attacks to end. This is about freedom of navigation, and the attacks are completely unacceptable, and that's why you've seen a response by the US-led group, of which Australia is contributing at the moment.
Coming up, extreme cold weather sweeps through Europe, causing travel chaos. Why some Chinese students are deciding their university degrees are worthless. And the commercial race to land on the moon heats up in the US. Beijing has called for an immediate ceasefire in Myanmar after several Chinese citizens were injured near the border by stray artillery shells. The incident occurred as a result of fighting in Shan State, which borders China's western Yunnan province. Conflict between Myanmar's ruling military junta and armed ethnic rebel groups has been escalating across the country in recent months, prompting warnings of interventions by neighbouring China.
Panicked bystanders flee from an explosion on a street in Nansan in China's Yunnan province. 5 people injured, according to Chinese state media, by shells misfired into Chinese territory from across the border in Myanmar's Shan State during intensifying battles between the military and an alliance of ethnic minority armed groups.
中方高度关注缅北冲突态势，对武装冲突造成中方人员伤亡表示强烈不满，已向有关方面提出严正交涉。
In response to the incident, a spokesperson from the Canberra office of the exiled National Unity Government of Myanmar said the Chinese government official issued a clear warning. The Chinese government has continuously emphasised the need for safeguarding the safety of Chinese projects and personnel in Myanmar. It also noted approximately 9 years ago, 5 Chinese citizens lost their lives when the Burmese army mistakenly bombed the Chinese side amid the Battle of Kokang. There have been numerous internal conflicts for decades, the military coup in 2021 unifying many of the rebel groups who made gains in several regions despite ceasefire talks brokered by Beijing. Not the first time fighting has spilled across the border. In 2015, shelling in Shan State also landed in Yunnan, injuring 1 Chinese and 4 Myanmar nationals.
中方将采取必要措施，维护本国公民生命和财产安全。
Last week, the Chinese embassy in Myanmar urged its citizens to leave the border area as soon as possible. Despite the military's loosening grip on power, leaders are releasing nearly 10,000 mostly political prisoners to mark the 76th anniversary of independence from Britain. No indication those include ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Alexandra Jones, SBS World News.
Rescuers have freed thousands of people trapped in their vehicles in heavy snow in Sweden. The travel chaos unfolded as temperatures plummeted across parts of Europe, with many facing extreme cold and floods.
In southern Sweden, hundreds of vehicles ground to a halt. Heavy snowfall making parts of the E22 motorway impassable, leaving thousands stranded.
Jag har väntat här i 12, snart 13 timmar. Så ja, känns som man kan detta nu.
That delay lasting up to 24 hours for some, as rescuers worked through the night to free those trapped. Further north, Sweden recorded its coldest night in 25 years this week, with temperatures dropping to minus 43.6 degrees Celsius. The extreme cold has been felt across Scandinavia. It's part of a storm that's also impacting Western Europe. Heavy rains have led to flooding in countries including France and Germany. Residents in this village working together to try and prevent further damage. Germany's Chancellor arriving to share these words of praise.
Es ist sehr beeindruckend zu sehen, wie Solidarität hier dazu beiträgt, Sicherheit für die Bürgerinnen und Bürger und auch für die ganze Landschaft zu gewährleisten. Seit vielen, vielen Tagen sind unzählige Bürgerinnen und Bürger, aber auch die Hilfsorganisationen und die staatlichen Institutionen im Einsatz.
The cold wave has also swept western Russia, with temperatures in some areas plummeting below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Meteorologists say that's the coldest start to the year since 1942. The State Russian Museum providing a warm refuge, but long queues kept some locked out.
Пришли в Русский музей, но билетов, к сожалению, не получилось взять.
Others embracing the biting cold, braving a chilly dip in the Neva River.
Отлично, отлично.
And in the UK, Heavy rain is pounding already sodden ground in the wake of what's been named Storm Henk. Residents have been evacuated from flooded homes, with hundreds of active flood warnings still in place. With temperatures expected to remain below seasonal averages, it's a chilling start to a new year. Sophie Bennett, SBS World News.
It's been revealed Russian hackers made their way inside Ukraine's telecommunications giant Kyivstar more than 6 months ago. Ukraine's spy chief told Reuters the security breach is one of the most dramatic since Russia's full-scale invasion nearly 2 years ago. It knocked out services for some 24 million users for several days. Ukraine's cyber warfare unit said Russians were able to trawl data from its biggest telecom provider in what should be a big warning to the West. Scientists have welcomed the discovery of an entirely new type of antibiotic, raising hopes that it could control one of the world's most dangerous superbugs. The drug is still at the experimental stage, but if human trials prove successful, it would be a much-needed new treatment for resistant bacteria.
A life-saving drug which has revolutionized medical science.
Since the discovery of the first antibiotic, penicillin, these precious drugs have saved countless lives. But there's been no new class of antibiotics against the most resistant bacteria, known as gram-negative, in over 50 years. Research in the journal Nature explains the new compound was able to eradicate crab infections in petri dishes and in mice. But getting any new antibiotic from the lab to patients could take up to a decade of human trials.
This could definitely save lives because we urgently need antibiotics, because if there are no antibiotics, particularly against gram-negative infections, we might see the end of modern medicine, because any minor infection, people will die, because drug-resistant infection, people can die within weeks.
Antimicrobial resistance is linked to around 5 million deaths worldwide each year, so the battle against superbugs is one humanity can't afford to lose.
Fergus Walsh with that report. Millions of young people in China are struggling to find jobs as the country's economic slowdown is causing historically high youth unemployment. Latest official figures show China's overall unemployment rate at over 5%, but among 16 to 24-year-olds in urban areas, it rises to more than 20%. In other words, 1 in 5 young people out of work. China has even suspended publication of its youth jobless data since reporting that record high.
Joy is the first person in her family to get a university degree. Only around a third of her class have found full-time jobs. She's taken a job in sales, not a dream career, but she's determined to make the most of every opportunity.
Do you think it's more difficult now than when your parents were growing up to get a job?
Yes, the fact is, there are lots of jobs. The problem is whether you are willing to lower your expectations. These jobs don't have good prospect for your future. They offer low salaries, and you are easily replaceable. That's why most people would rather stay at home than choose one of these jobs.
Some disillusioned graduates posted photos on social media, suggesting their degrees were worthless. Others lay on the ground, lying flat it's called, a term used by young people opting out of the competition of modern life.
As the number of young, unemployed people continued to rise, the Chinese leader, President Xi, came up with an idea. For decades, young people have left rural areas such as this. They've gone to big cities to study and find a job. He wants them to come back, get employment here and revitalise rural economies. The problem is, young people are finding it's not that easy.
Many jobs in the country are lower paid and require fewer skills. Even in the city, at this job fair in Beijing, there's a skills gap. Most of the openings don't need a master's degree. Mr. Xi wants the next generation to eat bitterness, a way of saying, just suck it up. But after enduring years of strict COVID lockdowns, many young people don't want a hard life. Zheng Guling has a marketing degree from a city a few hours' drive from Beijing. After a few months of searching, she's taken a job in customer service for now. Both she and her boyfriend want to work, but the pandemic also changed their outlook on life.
My parents are less educated. The things they've encountered, the places they've visited, are few and limited. They've never left their home province. They just want a stable life. But we want to see more things, see the outside world, and think about what we really dream of.
Studying hard no longer guarantees a glittering career in China. The post-COVID generation is adjusting its expectations and finding its own way through an ailing job market. Leaders will hope to get a grip on this crisis in the next year, in case it festers into a more troublesome generational discontent.
Laura Bicker reporting from Chin Wang Dao. A man who died while waiting for an ambulance in Adelaide's east has been identified as a client of a disability service provider. In pain and vomiting, the 54-year-old, known as Eddie, died in Hectorville last week with a 10-hour delay in getting him emergency help, blamed on a significant backup of ambulances waiting outside hospitals across the city. The South Australian Premier has ordered an investigation into the circumstances surrounding his death.
This government and my thoughts are with the deceased and their next of kin and their family. But ambulance response times need to improve more than what they already have, but they're a lot better than what they were 2 years ago, and that's a statement of absolute fact.
Health officials say Eddie's case was given higher priority during the evening after his condition deteriorated. But while ambulances then responded within 4 minutes, it was too late to save him. The Queensland government has put a price tag of more than $2 billion on the cost of recovery from natural disasters in the state's far north and southeast. Premier Stephen Miles has announced a multi-million-dollar relief package aimed at bringing tourists back to some of the affected areas.
Such was the severity of Queensland's wild Christmas weather. At one stage, as many as 130,000 homes were without electricity. Efforts continue today to restore power across the southeast. An Australian Defence Force deployment bolstered by an extra 20 troops. The state's treasurer says at least 61,000 Queenslanders are receiving financial assistance, with more than 1,300 homes damaged.
The preliminary estimate of Queensland Treasury of the cost of the natural disaster events in the far north and the southeast is $2 billion. But that is a very preliminary figure.
The Premier today visited the remote community of Wujal Wujal after earlier announcing a joint state and federal $5 million tourism package, providing discount flights and accommodation for the Cairns and Port Douglas regions.
Book in, come along, have a fantastic holiday, and at the same time support fellow Australians, fellow Queenslanders who are recovering from the impacts of disaster.
The funding welcomed at a time when visitor numbers should be at their peak.
It's been 4 weeks since this began, and on the back of 2.5 years of really tough times for the tourism industry, this is the lifeline that the industry needs.
But for the community north of the Daintree River, the announcement provided little comfort.
For smaller operators, and particularly in the upper Daintree, it's absolutely meaningless to us because people cannot get to us.
The road to Cape Tribulation is closed, and a ferry crossing the Daintree is only for essential services, bringing tourism in Jackie Biggs community to a standstill.
We're all good to go, but you just can't get to the property at the moment. And we've lost about $10,000 so far.
The financial recovery set to extend well beyond the end of the clean-up. Taisok Yuzi, SBS World News.
2024 looms as a major year for space exploration as several nations vie to establish a presence on the surface of the moon. And in just days, the first commercial lunar mission will launch. That's viewed as key ahead of NASA astronauts making a spaceflight in November. It'll be the first in over half a century.
I was strolling on the moon one day.
The last lunar sojourn, Apollo 17, the final US mission to touch down on the moon's desolate surface.
Oh man, that's incredible.
Now this probe is being prepared to end the nation's 52-year absence. Launching from Cape Canaveral next week, Peregrine 1, built by Astrobotic Technology, represents the first commercial moon launch. A 2-month mission carrying NASA equipment and private payloads from 8 nations.
All Nova controllers go, no go for launch.
But it faces competition to get there. Another American commercial probe, built by Intuitive Machines, will be launched February and aims to reach the surface first. Both probes part of NASA's commercial strategy to return humans to the moon.
These little landers that are going up to land in the next couple of months, they're the scouts.
Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1.
Using the Orion rocket, NASA's Artemis program aims to launch its first crewed lunar mission in November. The 4 astronauts will be the first to orbit the moon in half a century. These remotely controlled commercial missions serve the ambitious program. Astrobotic is entrusted with landing the agency's Viper lunar rover by year's end. A key focus of those later missions is the search for water, centred on the lunar South Pole. NASA's telescopes have extensively mapped the area for water signals. The blue areas show where ice is most likely to be found.
It's an indication that a human base can settle there in the future if we can create the ideal environment for it.
NASA's Artemis 3 aims to land humans from 2025. But America, just one player in this new space race. Japan launched its lunar probe in September, expected to land within weeks. India managed the feat last year. China, Israel and Russia share its ambitions.
There is a clear international space law, is that no country can claim any territorial area in any part of the space. However, there is a grey area in terms of mining and also lunar landing.
2024 also promises to be historic for Australian spaceflight. The first Australian-built rocket to reach orbit, planned to launch from North Queensland as early as March.
What we do with our launch is we give Australia the ability to put our own technology into space.
Hoping to join 10 other nations who've crossed the final frontier. Naveen Razik, SBS World News.
Well, the Australian share market has had its worst start to a new year since way back in 2007. SBS finance editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins us now with more. And Ricardo, the Santa rally has well and truly faded.
Yeah, Anton, investors were teased with the share market flirting with record highs as the new year started, but that optimism faded on Wednesday, with shares falling for 3 consecutive days to be down 1.3% on the week. Don't forget, though, it followed a very strong rally, with shares up almost 12% since the start of November. And that was driven by expectations the US will cut interest rates numerous times this year. And tonight we'll get an indication of the health of the US economy, with jobs numbers to be released.
It really goes back to whether investors become a little bit too confident and perhaps a little overexcited about where interest rates could go in the year ahead. Really what we have seen this week is a change in expectations around the timing and path for US interest rates, and it's only been marginal, but it's those marginal things that drive sentiment and certainly drive asset prices.
Today, the ASX 200 finished in the red, but only just, down 0.1%. Tech stocks performed worst, while the iron ore miners also declined. Banks and health-related companies did well. $1 Australian is buying just under 67 US cents and is lower against the British pound and Chinese yuan. The United Nations has warned of a looming period of low global growth as economies grapple with higher borrowing costs, geopolitical tensions and climate risks. In its World Economic Situation and Prospects report released overnight, it predicted that world GDP will ease to 2.4% this year, and it's calling for bold investments to drive sustainable development and climate action to put global growth on a stronger path. It says Australia's economy will slow faster, with the major downside risks being lower demand and weaker than expected growth in China and the US. It also warned that inflation in Australia will remain relatively high this year because of an acceleration in rental prices driven by housing supply shortages. Businesses around the world are warning that continued disruption to global shipping in the Red Sea amid heightened tensions in the region may lead to less choice for consumers. By avoiding the shortcut and going around the south of Africa instead, journey times are extended by around 2 weeks.
Today, Next became the latest major retailer to warn deliveries of its stock could be delayed. Hopefully it would be resolved in the next month or so, but if it isn't, what we'd like to see is probably slightly reduced choice of the things we'd normally see in things like clothing retailers and electrical retailers, and also maybe longer delivery times, particularly of new products, because they'll take longer to come from the factories in the Far East to our stores here in Britain.
The United States, Britain and 10 other countries have warned rebel forces in Yemen they will face consequences if attacks on commercial ships continue, warning they posed a direct threat to freedom of navigation.
I'm not going to spell out here what action will be taken, but it's quite clear to me this is unacceptable, this is illegal. It's not to do with Gaza, it's not to do with Israel. This is about the freedom of navigation. This is about the ability of ships to carry their cargo. The world economy, every economy, will suffer if ships keep coming under attack in this illegal and unacceptable way.
Global shipping has been rocked by other crises in the past few years. The huge container ship Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal in 2021, and the COVID pandemic caused extensive supply chain disruption. How much of a headache this latest problem becomes for businesses and consumers will depend on how long the threat to one of the world's busiest trade routes continues.
Katie Austin reporting there, and the Australian Retailers Association told SBS the Red Sea challenges have less impact on Australian retail, given a lot of imports come straight from Southeast Asia. The bigger challenge, it says, is industrial action at ports operator DP World, which is impacting vessel unloading and congestion. Combined, the ARA says it will become yet another cost that retailers have to carry. And the inflation tug-of-war between retailers and global food giants has stepped up a notch, with French retailer Carrefour refusing to stock the products of one of its suppliers. The group says it won't sell foods and drinks from US manufacturer PepsiCo in France because of what it calls unacceptable price increases. Last year, Carrefour started a shrinkflation campaign of sticking warnings on products that have shrunk in size but cost more.
Je crois qu'il va y avoir plein de produits qu'on va laisser de côté parce que ça devient trop cher. Et surtout ça sont des choses qu'on peut éviter. Surtout les sodas, on peut les laisser de côté facilement. C'est pas obligatoire et c'est pas nécessaire. C'est un petit goût en fait.
PepsiCo hasn't yet responded to having its products made unavailable. Anton, it gives another meaning to the term war on inflation.
Thanks, Ricardo. Coming up. 24 days of art, music, theatre and comedy kick off at the 2024 Sydney Festival. And the SCG, adorned in pink as a flurry of late wickets, shakes up the third day of the pink test. The 2024 Sydney Festival has begun, and among the many diverse stories being shared this year is an art installation by renowned Maori artist Lisa Rehana. It tells the story of the discovery of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
It's a sight that's hard to miss, but this sculpture of Te Wheke floating on Waterman's Cove in Barangaroo is more than just a feast for the eyes.
It speaks to the woman who actually named New Zealand Aotearoa, or the North Island.
According to Māori mythology, legendary fisherman and navigator Kupe chased down and eventually killed the giant octopus on a journey that led to his discovery of Aotearoa. But Lisa Rehana says he wasn't alone.
Kupe, a very famous Tahitian navigator, but so was his wife, Hinete Aparangi, and I wanted to bring her to the forefront, as well as this octopus being a female entity from the natural world. Her story is one of movement and the natural world, and why Māori ended up in New Zealand.
These are South Pacific stories, and being a harbour city and a harbour that's very much about saltwater stories, a city with so many freshwater stories, all hugging our river systems and our water systems, it felt really important to do that.
Today's opening also featuring the traditional Māori sounds of the Te Aranganui Choir. As well as some 4-metre seagulls causing mischief in the crowd. The Sydney Festival will run from today until the 28th of January, taking in more than 50 venues across the city and showcasing the talents of hundreds of local and international artists.
We listen to the stories that are coming, you know, whether that's environmental, political, social, recreational, it could be geographic stories, and their issues too. These are issues that we're facing every single day.
Share different creation stories, local stories, but certainly in these current times, thinking about the natural world.
Programs featuring art, music and performances set to take place every day for the next 24 days, from sunrise to sunset and beyond. Mahnoz Anguri, SBS World News.
Sport now in Sydney was showered in pink today to mark the annual celebrations of Jane McGrath Day. It was a day of highs and lows for Pakistan, though. Amir Jamal's 6-wicket haul gave the tourists a 14-run first innings lead, but Pakistan collapsed to end the day at 7 for 68 and staring a series clean sweep in the face.
Sydney's gloomy weather no match for the dazzling pink on display. A day marked in tradition decorating the SCG. Both sides of the test match taking their hats off for Jane McGrath Day.
Tremendous respect shown.
Veteran Australian cricketer Glenn McGrath, flanked by his daughters, carrying on the legacy of his wife Jane to raise awareness and funds for breast cancer.
I don't think there's too many people around the country that haven't been touched by breast cancer in some way, shape or form. So to have a positive impact on people's lives is amazing.
One of the world's biggest charitable sport events is usually all things pink. For the first time, the focus veered to green.
I am pleased and relieved that I've got my baggie back in my hands. Any cricketer knows how special their cap is, and I'll cherish this for the rest of my life.
Back to play, and Marnus Labuschagne raised his bat for a worthy half-century.
He's a quality player.
Despite Pakistan's agonising efforts.
Oh no, let's hope there's nothing too dramatic there.
Rain interrupted play yesterday, but it was some sticky tape that forced today's delay.
Yeah. Oh, sure, it's not that little thing now, is it?
A stern order from Steve Smith.
It is.
An unlikely hero basking in his newfound fame, with a standing ovation from the stands.
Oh.
Smith silencing the critics.
Just to prove a point.
Only to have fallen into a rookie trap the very next over.
And can you believe it?
Labuschagne reached 60 before he was undone.
Wow, what a ripper that is!
The Prime Minister made a commentary box appearance before joining the annual high tea. After lunch, Marsh oozing comfort. 4 after 4, snagging his 4th 50 in a row.
Another fine innings.
By the afternoon, the sun came out and so did Amir Jamal. His shining light stole the show.
Ouch, just like that.
Praising a higher order in his debut test series.
And Jamal has 6 for 69.
Before soaking up a moment he'll never forget.
Obviously, I'm over the moon now. Definitely I'm feeling proud to be representing my country at such level.
Jamal left Australia stunned, but Mitchell Starc soon had Sydney off its feet.
It's the worst possible result.
A 3-wicket maiden from Josh Hazlewood, leaving Pakistan staring at a series sweep sometime tomorrow.
Edge! Oh, don't believe it!
The tourists ahead by 83 with just 3 wickets remaining. Rayanne Tamer, SBS World News.
Fresh off the back of booking its place in the United Cup semi-final last night, Team Australia has touched down in Sydney. Just 2 wins away from snaring the Cup title, the team says the momentum from Perth leaves them ready to face any of the tennis elite.
Now in Sydney, Team Australia still riding the high of a 3-love win over Team Serbia and world number 1, Novak Djokovic.
It was a pretty special moment, one that I'll obviously remember for the rest of my life, and it's definitely not every day you get a win over, the best player in the world.
One major victory down, but in either Greece or Germany, Australia still faces some of the world's best as it contends for an early 2024 title.
We're as confident and believe as much as possible, I think, so that's going to give us the best chance if it comes to it. So, yeah, I'm just looking forward to playing here, continuing on from Perth, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Meanwhile, fellow Aussie Jason Kubler had his run at the Brisbane International come to an end, courtesy of a returning to form Rafael Nadal. After nearly a year out, riddled with injury, Nadal thankful for every minute on the court in the lead-up to the Australian Open.
Every day is a learning again, how to play every single point focus and with the right intensity, because at the end it's something that you lose. You need to get used to the competition again.
Over in the women's draw, Alexandra Popatova's preparation for the first major ended abruptly. After losing the first set 6-1, a stomach issue saw Popatova pull the plug on her meeting with world number 4 Elena Rybakina, leaving last year's Australian Open runner-up well rested as she enters the last four. Brianna Holden, SBS World News.
The Dakar rally gets underway in Saudi Arabia tonight, with many Australian fans hoping Toby Price can make it a hat-trick of titles after finishing runner-up last year. But he's not the only Australian taking part in the test of driving skill and endurance.
It is considered by many as the world's toughest motor race, contested over 2 weeks in the Saudi Arabian desert across 5,000 kilometres of competitive and treacherous terrain. Despite those dangers, Australia's involvement in the Dakar rally over the last decade has been hugely impressive. Among the outright contenders hoping to win the 46th edition of the event will be Victorian Daniel Sanders. The man affectionately known as Chucky will need luck to go his way if he is to win the event in his 4th attempt.
Yeah, we'll rely on a lot of luck and, somehow get to hold up a trophy at the end of the 2 weeks would be very nice.
Dakar 2024 will be Sanders' first race since suffering a double fracture in his right femur prior to last year's Finke Desert race in Alice Springs. Australia's involvement in Dakar isn't just restricted to 2 wheels, with the flag flying strongly in the 4-wheel component too. The Gold Coast Glenn Brinkman is making his Dakar debut in the T3 competition class for prototype buggies, assisted in navigation by Dal Moscott, who's making his 3rd start.
Yeah, look, I've been one of those people that always watches Dakar every January. Yeah, it was just like, for me, this would be the pinnacle of my motorsport career to go and do Dakar.
Connor McNally, SBS World News.
And a reminder, starting tomorrow, there's a daily highlights program right here on SBS, which can also be seen at SBS On Demand. Coming up, the weather and the last of the original rogue heroes farewelled at 103. Checking the weather now, remnants of convective cloud are beginning to clear throughout most of inland New South Wales, also Queensland, the Northern Territory and Western Australia. An onshore flow is producing low cloud about southern parts of WA and Victoria. In the major centres, a shower or 2 in Darwin. Showers also for Brisbane. Cloudy for the test match in Sydney, partly cloudy in Canberra and Melbourne. Sunny and a top of 25 in Hobart. Rain developing in Adelaide. Clear skies, though, for Perth. Looking further afield, a few showers in Apia, thunder in Nandi, rain in Papeete, a few showers in Noumea and Wellington. In Southeast Asia, partly cloudy in Bangkok and Phnom Penh, thunder in Kuala Lumpur, drizzle for Jakarta. Further north, clear in Seoul, fine also in Tokyo, partly cloudy in Hong Kong, a few showers in Hanoi, partly cloudy in Manila. Heading west, fine in Baghdad, partly cloudy in Islamabad and New Delhi, fog for Mumbai. On to Europe now, a few showers in Stockholm, snow in Berlin and Kiev, rain in Budapest, fine in Madrid, clouds in Istanbul. In Africa, showers in Algiers, clouds in Casablanca, thunder in Lagos, partly cloudy in Addis Ababa and Nairobi, and a few showers for Johannesburg. In South America, fine in Caracas, partly cloudy in Panama City and Bogota, rain for Rio de Janeiro, showers in Buenos Aires. And for North America, a few showers in Vancouver, rain for San Francisco, snow in Washington, fine in Los Angeles, and a few showers in Havana. The last surviving member of the original wartime British SAS has died, aged 103. Major Mike Sadler took part in wartime raids fighting Rommel's forces in Libya and guided special forces across the Sahara for hit-and-run raids on enemy bases. In 1944, he parachuted into Nazi-occupied France, winning the Military Cross for bravery in action. Sadler even had a portion of Antarctica named in his honour, a testament to a research mission he took part in.
Daughters will adore us and we'll sing in great chorus. Well done, Sister Suffragette. Good evening, Kate and Hannah.
And Glynis Johns, known best for her role as suffragette mother Winifred Banks in Mary Poppins, has died at the age of 100. Wearing the iconic Votes for Women sash, her rendition of Sister Suffragette is still considered something of a feminist anthem. Johns also starred in her self-titled TV series Glynis and had the hit song Send in the Clowns written to suit her distinctive voice in the Broadway play A Little Night Music. And that's the world this Friday. You can catch up on our bulletins on SBS On Demand and look for the top stories on the SBS News website. Claudia Farhad has the late news for you at 10:45, but for now from the team, good night.